come to you, Mr. Sinha, now. You know, the book categorically talks about how industrialization without carbonization is possible, right? And when I talk about this in simple terms for our guests, for all of us, you were focusing on how is it that India can economically, without really repeating the pollution-heavy paths that were taken by various countries. But how do you see this happening?
Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting question, and a part of the answer is something that Mr. Kant has always talked about, which is the fact that every challenge indeed has been an opportunity. So that's something that's gotten drilled into my head very clearly. But what you're talking about is very interesting. You see, I would say that we as India or as any other developing country, what we have today is the ability to not repeat not just the mistakes of the past, but also to take lessons from it. So essentially, as second movers, it would be safe to say that we have a first mover advantage, which is incredible, because back in the day when the world was industrializing, you didn't have advanced forms of battery storage. You did not have green hydrogen. You did not have green ammonia. You did not have artificial intelligence. You did not have any of this existing. But today, we have all of that existing. And what really differentiates India over here is that in India, both innovation and institutions are still evolving, right? Which is very different from the West. In the West, there is a level of institutional maturity that has been reached, which is not the case in India. So India is moving slowly in innovation, but very fast. Frugal innovation, we are the best. But we also have institutions which are still evolving. So we really have this wonderful and time-sensitive opportunity to ensure that both of them co-evolve and support each other. And I think that's really what's happening over here. So you're able to, like Mr. Kant talked about digital payments. The first time people have had experiences of banking in many rural areas has been straight onto their smartphones. So see the number of steps that we've actually skipped. And the same thing is very much possible for the clean energy transition. Many young buyers in urban areas would probably be buying their first vehicle in the form of an electric vehicle today versus going for an ICE engine vehicle. So I think the beauty over here, the answer to the how is exactly by sort of, I would say there are 4 C's involved in this, so as to say, which the book also talks about. I think the first is convergence, which is ensuring what is missing and what do we have to bring that. So let's say BMW, you're very good, you want to get into e-mobility, but that's also a demand, let's say in the country itself in terms of pollution or the government wanting to do it. The second is collaboration, which means not just collaboration between the industry, but collaboration between the industry and the government, collaboration between industry and startups, right? And then the third is actually when convergence and collaboration actually give way to credibility, because when you converge and when you collaborate to develop something which is really interesting, which is really path-breaking, what you do is you essentially gain credibility, not just with consumers and customers, but with the governments as well. And finally is to make sure that this entire process is sort of circular. So you need to make sure that this entire thing keeps going on. So I would say those are the 4 C's that underpin in India being able to industrialize without having really the need to follow the same carbon-intensive pathways that we've always followed. Yeah.
So focus on the 4 C's your way. Thank you so much for addressing that. So on a lighter note, I would love for you to join us and have a look at the BMW i7 that we have on display here. A lot of our guests have, and I'm sure you're going to appreciate not just the features, but the whole intent about putting that together. And before I come to you, Mr. Sinha, I would once again like to encourage my wonderful audience. My colleagues are all around. Just feel free to raise your hand, pass them a cue card, pen down your thoughts, who you'd like your question to be raised to, and we'll be taking a couple of them right here. So, Mr. Sinha, let me come to you. You know, very interestingly, in the book, both of you sort of spoke about the climate intelligent governance. In fact, you came up with this amazing idea and thought. How do you think that this can come into practice for transportation, mobility, especially in the auto segment, because we are partnering with the whole point of view that we get to learn as well with you. We are on this amazing learning curve. We'd love your thoughts on that, Mr. Sinha.
Yeah, so I think it's very interesting. AI actually, in an era where climate is basically defined as a threat multiplier, we define AI as a force multiplier precisely because it can do many of the things which otherwise conventionally you would not have been able to do. And I'm sure within BMW, if you were to speak to Mr. Brar, he would be able to tell you 55 different ways in which BMW itself is implementing AI. But on the climate governance side, the broader idea of AI was that how do we ensure right from the multilateral organizations who are running the world, who are sort of responsible for inter-country governance, to country governments, to even local governments. How can they actually use AI to make more efficient decisions? And some of those efficient decisions, if you're asking me in the context of BMW, for instance, it could be about, see, today one of the things that India still suffers from is range anxiety, which is why people still might want to purchase vehicles for, running within cities. But when it comes to traveling on highways, people are still scared. That is why in an average profile, you would see an Indian still having one EV, but also one ICE vehicle.
Right.
Now, one of the challenges with that is how do you figure out where exactly is the most optimum location for locating an electric vehicle charger? And when I say optimum, it doesn't just mean, oh, somebody's going to stop their vehicle at a rest point, so let me just install a charger
Right.
here. In a country which is as complicated as India, you have to look at 7 to 8 different factors. One of them is the location. The second is the electrical grid. Do you have the capacity to support chargers? Do you have co-located renewables that could power that charger?
Right.
Where are consumers making their choice of stopping a vehicle? So there's almost 15 to 16 data points that you can actually use today to understand where is it that you should locate an electric vehicle charger. Just as how today, if you see Google Maps today,
Yeah.
when I used to work at Google, we launched this feature in India, which is called FER, Fuel Efficient Routing. So today, whenever you look at a location on Google Maps, it actually shows you the fastest route, but
Yeah.
also the most fuel efficient route.
Right.
So as a consumer, that decision is yours. So the same algorithm can then be expanded to not just figure out where the EV chargers can be located, to also figuring out what is the most optimum time for actually charging your electric vehicle. Conventionally, people think it's the night, but actually it's the night time where the load on the grid is actually the highest.
Oh.
And it's also the time when the grid is the most coal heavy, right? Because in India, despite so much of our installed capacity being from renewables, a vast majority of consumption still happens from coal, because as Mr. Kant rightly pointed out, the storage element is missing. So if you're charging all your vehicles at night, you're essentially consuming more and more and more coal-based power. So actually AI can also tell you what is the most optimum time to charge your vehicle. And and just to conclude, there's actually two ways to do this, right? One is the more conventional way where AI is able to, look at all the data sources and it's able to tell you, hey, this is the best time. But today the power of AI is that even in countries where the power system is not integrated, where the data points are not integrated, today you've got advanced AI models which are actually able to look at satellite imagery to
Right.
see what time the coal emissions are actually the maximum, and parallelly look at consumption patterns to then suggest, oh, hey, it is quite likely that at this hour at your home, the power is actually clean versus being dirty. So even without having to do all the data integration, AI can still tell you what's the best time to do this. Yeah.
I'd like to ask my audience members, how many of you actually knew that? How many of you really knew that there's a better time to sort of put your EV on charging? All right, fantastic. So I think for a lot of others, you just enlightened us on that. So thank you so much. Mr. Sinha, after both the amazing speakers shared their thoughts with us, I want to ask you that today we're talking about these connected cars really generating huge amounts of data. How do you think we can use this data, and how do you think this data can actually help us and cities become a lot more smarter in other ways?
You mean the data that's being generated
Yeah.
just by the vehicles, or
That's right.
more generally? No, everything. Like, look, I think today, I'll tell you something about data. Before you come to data, I think the biggest problem is that when it comes to data, this data is all over the place, right? So BMW may be generating its own data, a Mercedes may be generating its own data, a fast charger company may be generating its own data. Unfortunately, the biggest challenge with data in India is not that it exists. It is the fact that it is not democratized, and it is not democratized on a common platform. I think that is one of the biggest things that actually prevents some of the most innovative solutions from, coming up in the country.
Right.
So the key to that actually is that there should be a single sort of a portal or a repository of data where all of this data should be made available. And it's beautiful because AI algorithms can actually take all of this data and it can look at things which you otherwise would not have been able to look at. But I think the step one of that is ensuring that this data is at least put out into the public domain. It is not being put out. Everybody, an air purifier company today, Sharp, for instance, will say, well, this is my data, so I'm not going to give it to you.
Right.
But the idea is that if I know how much my vehicle is emitting, if I know how much an air purifier, which is, let's say, sitting in a BMW showroom or at your house, is actually able to see, you will never be able to match so many of these data points together.
Right.
So I think the solution, actually, the government of India has taken a rather interesting step. So there is something called IUDX, which is the Indian Urban Data Exchange. And what they're doing is that they're trying to put all sources of data, right from the timing of a traffic signal to how much energy a solar panel is generating, onto a common platform. I think the same thing needs to be done for the automobile sector, but the question that you need to ask yourselves is that, are all of you willing to actually put out this data in the public domain? Because if you can actually do wonderful things with it. Not just charging infrastructure, but also governments understanding how the air quality is changing, how it is improving, how it is worsening, to the travel times, to the travel patterns of citizens, to finding the most optimum routes, right? It might be the case that people have stopped traveling between Delhi and Meerut, so it might be the case that the Namo Bharat trains are the most now the most taken option, so let's focus more on investing further in that. So there's hundreds of things that they can tell you, but I think it starts with you making that call, whether that data needs to be digital public infrastructure or not.
So actually there's a very thin line of privacy sort of coming into picture there. So again, a very valid point. How open are we as consumers today in sharing that data or not? And I think that's a call that one takes individually. So we're not going to enter that domain, so to say. Mr. Sinha, I'm going to come to you because I want to ask you, what is it that you're more passionate about, reading or writing?
I would say it was reading at some point, but now, thanks to Mr. Kant, it's writing. So.
Amazing. And now that the two of you have co-authored this book, very soon we're going to be showcasing a beautiful unveiling moment. I'd encourage all of you to capture that video, share it on your social media. Please do remember to tag us and encourage more and more people to not just buy the book, but read it, because it has so many amazing points, which this discussion of about 30 to 45 minutes really can't cover. So I'd really encourage all of you to read and spread the word. And on that note, I'm now going to be kickstarting with the questions that have come from my amazing audience. First, thank you so much for sending these. This truly means that you've been listening in and enjoying the conversation.
I'll just add to that. I think what Mr. Kant has said is fantastic. And to your question, I just wanted to add one other little thing, which is, I think it's also interesting to look at how data centers can be seen as an opportunity, not just for adding more clean energy, but also for contributing to India's rural and semi-urban development. And the reason why I say that is today, there is a Meta data center in Mexico, which is actually using water, which has basically been recycling. They've recycled the wastewater of the entire city, and they're using that in the data center. There's so many villages and cities in India which today don't have a wastewater recycling plant. Right. By the virtue of setting up a data center, you're also, creating now a wastewater recycling plant which can give water back to those villages. Similarly, in Hamina, Google's data center in Finland, they're actually using the waste heat from that data center to keep homes warm. Of course, you don't want to do this in the cities, but if you're building even a small data center in Ladakh, imagine the power that district heating can give you. Yeah. And in Johor, in Malaysia, which is one of the biggest data center parks there, they're actually setting up renewable energy on site, round-the-clock carbon-free energy on site. So as Mr. Kant said, use that as an opportunity to bring additional renewable energy into the picture. So I think India has everything. We have green electrons, which is green power. We have green molecules, which is green ammonia and green hydrogen. I think the way forward is now to have green tokens, which is green AI.